A fully boarded 747, engines ready to spool, is about to depart from JFK to London. In business class, a seasoned lawyer, Kevin Marshall, is settling in for his flight. He's black, impeccably dressed, and has paid a premium for his window seat. Suddenly, a flight attendant approaches him with a tight, artificial smile. "Sir," she says, her voice loud enough for others to hear, "I'm going to need you to move. We have a VIP passenger who requires this seat." What she doesn't know is that she isn't just asking a man to move. She's challenging a master strategist who holds the key to grounding their entire aircraft. The next 10 minutes will unleash a storm of corporate panic, public humiliation, and career-ending karma that will ripple from the tarmac in New York all the way to the boardrooms of London. The air inside Global Air Flight 110 was a familiar symphony of manufactured calm. The gentle hum of the auxiliary power unit, the filtered, slightly stale scent of recycled air, and the soft clinking of glasses as the pre-departure beverage service commenced in the Polaris business class cabin. For Kevin Marshall, it was a sanctuary of sorts, a liminal space between the frenetic energy of his New York law firm, Marshall & Associates, and the high-stakes corporate arbitration waiting for him in London. At 45, Kevin had cultivated an aura of unflappable composure. It was his greatest asset in the courtroom and in life. His suit, a bespoke charcoal piece from Savile Row, was immaculate even after a hectic morning. His leather briefcase, resting by his feet, contained documents that could decide the fate of a multi-billion-dollar tech merger. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a closer, a man corporations called when the stakes were impossibly high. He had specifically chosen Seat 12A. It was a window seat on the port side, just behind the massive Rolls-Royce Trent 800 engine. Some found the engine view distracting. Kevin found it meditative. The raw power, the precision engineering, it reminded him of his own practice, meticulous preparation leading to an unstoppable force. He had used a considerable number of his frequent flyer miles, topped up with a cash payment, to secure this specific seat for the overnight flight. He planned to work for 2 hours, eat a light meal, and then sleep, arriving in London, rested and ready for battle. As passengers filed in, he observed them with a practiced, unobtrusive eye. The young couple on their honeymoon, giddy with excitement. The seasoned executive across the aisle, already tapping away at his laptop. A picture of efficiency. The cabin was a cross-section of humanity, temporarily bound together in a pressurized aluminum tube hurtling through the sky. Kevin took a sip of his sparkling water, the condensation on the glass cool against his fingers. He had a pre-flight ritual, reviewing the key points of his opening argument. He visualized the opposing counsel, the arbitrators, the flow of the debate. He was lost in this mental preparation when a shadow fell over his seat. He looked up to see a flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun. Her name tag read Leora. Her smile was professionally plastered on, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were scanning him, taking in his tailored suit, his expensive watch, and his dark skin, and somehow the combination seemed to create a flicker of cognitive dissonance in her expression. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice a little too loud, drawing the attention of the passengers in the surrounding seats. Kevin placed his reading glasses on the open file in his lap. "Yes? Can I help you?" he asked, his tone even and polite. "I'm going to need you to move," she stated, not asked. "We need this seat." Kevin's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. He glanced at the empty seat next to him, then back at her. "I'm sorry. There must be a misunderstanding. This is my assigned seat, 12A. He gestured to his boarding pass, which lay on the small console next to him. Leora's smile tightened, becoming more of a grimace. "I understand that, sir. But the situation has changed. We have a very important passenger who needs to be seated here. We have another seat for you in the back of the cabin." The phrase "back of the cabin" hung in the air, loaded with implication. Kevin knew exactly what it meant. A middle seat, likely near the galley or a lavatory, a seat no one wanted. He had paid for a premium experience, not a downgrade. More than the inconvenience, however, it was the casual dismissiveness that pricked at him. The assumption that he, the calm black man in the expensive suit, was the most pliable, the most easily moved piece on the chessboard. "I'm afraid that won't work for me," Kevin said, his voice still quiet, but now infused with a new firmness. "I selected this seat for a reason and paid the corresponding fare. I'd like to remain here." Leora's patience, already thin, seemed to snap. "Sir," she said, her voice taking on a patronizing edge, "Mr. Thorne is one of our Global Services VIPs. He flies with us several times a week. We have to accommodate him. It's just policy." And then Kevin saw him. Standing behind Leora, radiating an aura of impatient entitlement, was Adrian Thorne. He was a man who looked like he was poured into his designer blazer, his face florid, his expensive haircut glinting under the cabin lights. He held his phone to his ear, speaking in loud, clipped tones about leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers. He wasn't even paying attention to the exchange, so certain was he of the outcome. He simply expected the obstacle, Kevin, to be removed. The passengers nearby were now openly staring. The executive across the aisle had stopped typing. The honeymooning couple looked on with wide, uncertain eyes. The calm sanctuary of the cabin had been breached, and the air was now thick with tension. Kevin Marshall, a man who dismantled arguments for a living, took a slow, deliberate breath. He was being presented with an argument, one based on a faulty premise of hierarchy and status, and he was about to dismantle it. "Policy," Kevin repeated softly, looking directly at Leora. "Could you please show me the specific global air condition of carriage that allows you to involuntarily downgrade a ticketed, confirmed passenger who has not violated any rules in order to accommodate another passenger of a higher status? I'd be very interested to read it." Leora's face went blank. The practiced smile vanished completely, replaced by a flush of angry confusion. She had expected compliance, perhaps a bit of grumbling. She had not expected to be quoted chapter and verse from her own company's rulebook. The game had just changed. The silence that followed Kevin's question stretched for a few uncomfortable seconds. Leora, the senior flight attendant, looked as if she'd been slapped. Her training had prepared her for drunk passengers, medical emergencies, and security threats. It had not prepared her for a calm, articulate man in seat 12A, quoting contract law at 30,000 feet. "Sir, there's no need to be difficult," she stammered, recovering slightly. Her voice took on the tone of a weary schoolteacher addressing a stubborn child. "We're trying to provide the best service to all our customers, and Mr. Thorne has specific needs." Adrian Thorne, finally sensing the delay, ended his call with an exasperated sigh. He looked past Leora and fixed his gaze on Kevin. It wasn't a look of inquiry, but of annoyance, like a man swatting at a fly that had landed on his lunch. "Is there a problem here?" Thorne asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He didn't address Kevin directly, but spoke to Leora, as if Kevin were a piece of luggage that had been misplaced. "Leora, just get him moved. I need to make some calls before we take off. My time is valuable. The public dismissal, the utter refusal to even acknowledge his existence as an equal, solidified Kevin's resolve. This was no longer about a seat. It was about dignity. It was about the 1,000 small cuts, the subtle and overt acts of disrespect he had navigated his entire life, from the scholarship kid at a prestigious prep school to the only black partner at his first law firm. Kevin slowly turned his head to meet Adrian Thorne's gaze. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His power lay in his stillness, his precision. "My name is Kevin Marshall," he said, his voice cutting through the cabin's low hum. "And you must be Mr. Thorne. It seems you and I have a problem. You want my seat. And I, having paid for it, intend to keep it. My time," he added, with a pointed glance at his own files, "is also valuable." Thorne blinked, clearly taken aback. He was a man accustomed to a world that bent to his will. His net worth, his title, his platinum-encrusted airline status card. These were the tools he used to shape his reality. For a passenger, any passenger, to so calmly and directly refuse him was an alien concept. "Do you know who I am?" Thorne sneered, falling back on the classic refrain of the entitled. "Based on your behavior, I can make an educated guess," Kevin replied coolly. "But it's irrelevant. On this aircraft, we are all ticketed passengers, governed by the same rules." Leora, seeing the situation spiraling out of her control, intervened with renewed, if flustered, authority. "Sir, I am the lead flight attendant on this service. If you refuse to comply with a crew member's instructions, I can have you removed from the flight." It was the nuclear option, and she had just brandished it. The threat hung in the air, ripe with unspoken implications of security, of law enforcement, of a black man being forcibly removed from a plane. It was a threat designed to intimidate, to leverage societal prejudices to her advantage. Several passengers gasped. The executive across the aisle slowly shook his head, a look of disgust on his face. Kevin held up a hand, a calming, authoritative gesture. "Let's be very clear, Leora," he said, using her name for the first time. "A crew member's instruction must be lawful. An instruction to vacate a seat I have legally purchased to accommodate another passenger is not a lawful instruction related to safety or security. It's a customer service preference. If you attempt to have me removed on these grounds, Global Air will be facing a lawsuit of a magnitude you cannot possibly imagine by the time we were scheduled to land. It will be a case study in discriminatory practices for years to come." He wasn't bluffing, and his tone made that abundantly clear. He was speaking his native language, the language of liability, of precedent, of consequences. Leora's face paled. The word lawsuit was a trigger for any airline employee, but the way Kevin said it, with the calm certainty of a surgeon describing an incision he was about to make, was terrifying. Adrian Thorne, however, was merely enraged. His face turned a shade redder. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling my office. I'm calling the CEO of this airline." "You," he snarled, finally pointing a trembling finger at Kevin, "are going to regret this. You have no idea the trouble you're making for yourself." "On the contrary," Kevin said, turning his attention back to the file in his lap as a clear sign of dismissal. "I think you're the one who has no idea." The standoff was complete. The cabin was a tinderbox of tension. Leora stood frozen, her threat exposed as an empty one. Thorne fumed, his sense of power utterly neutered. Kevin appeared to be calmly reviewing his legal notes, but beneath the surface, his mind was racing. He had won the battle of wills, but he knew they wouldn't just let it go. They would escalate. And as he sat there, feigning nonchalance, his gaze drifted out the window to the massive engine and the wing stretching out into the evening gloom of the JFK tarmac. And that's when he saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible detail that, in an instant, gave him a completely new and devastatingly effective strategy. The game wasn't over. It was about to be taken to a whole new level. The air in the business class cabin crackled with unspoken conflict. Leora, the flight attendant, having lost control of the situation, did what all employees do when faced with a problem beyond their pay grade. She escalated. She scurried away toward the front galley, her face a mask of indignation and panic. Adrian Thorne, meanwhile, was on his phone, pacing the small galley area like a caged bull. His voice was a low, furious growl, spitting out phrases like unacceptable, breach of contract, and platinum status means nothing. Kevin Marshall remained in seat 12A, the eye of the hurricane. To the casual observer, he might have looked completely unbothered, perhaps even smug. He had picked up his pen and was making small annotations on the documents in his lap. But his focus wasn't on the billion-dollar merger. His mind was processing what he had just seen out the window. Boarding a few minutes earlier, he'd walked down the jet bridge and glanced through the small window at the wing, as was his habit. He'd noticed 2 ground crew members near the engine, one pointing at a panel on the wing's leading edge, their conversation animated and partially obscured by the noise of the tarmac. One of them had wiped at the spot with a rag. Kevin had thought nothing of it. Routine checks. But now, under the powerful glare of the terminal's floodlights, he could see it from his seat. A faint, dark, iridescent sheen, slicking back from that very same panel, barely visible against the dark grey of the wing. It looked like a liquid, catching the light in a way that rainwater wouldn't. It looked like hydraulic fluid. His mind, trained to connect disparate pieces of information into a coherent narrative, began to work. The animated ground crew, the wipe down, the visible sheen. It could be nothing. It could be residual cleaning fluid, or it could be a sign of an active hydraulic leak, a pinprick-sized breach that was slowly but surely weeping vital fluid from one of the aircraft's most critical systems. Just then, Leora returned, this time with backup. The purser, a stern-looking man named Frank, flanked her. His expression was one of grave seriousness, as if he were preparing to defuse a bomb rather than handle a seat dispute. "Sir," Frank began, his voice deep and authoritative. "I'm Frank, the cabin service manager. Leora has explained the situation to me. We've made a request. We are now upgrading that request to a crew instruction. I need you to take seat 18E immediately, so we can close the doors and depart on time." 18E, a middle seat in the last row of the business cabin, right by the noise and bustle of the premium economy galley. It was a deliberate and punitive downgrade. Kevin looked up slowly, meeting Frank's gaze. "Frank," he said, his tone still remarkably even, "with all due respect, you're about to make a very serious mistake. You are continuing to operate under the misapprehension that this is a customer service issue. It is not. It is a contract issue and potentially a civil rights issue. I am a fare-paying passenger in my assigned seat. You have no legal basis to move me for the convenience of Mr. Thorne." Frank's jaw tightened. "Sir, we are responsible for the order and safety of this cabin. Your refusal to cooperate is becoming a disruption." "A disruption?" Kevin countered, his voice rising just enough to command attention. "The disruption began when your crew attempted to unlawfully disenfranchise me of a service I paid for, based on the arbitrary status of another passenger. The disruption is Mr. Thorne shouting on his phone in the galley. I am sitting here, quietly, in my seat. Who is the disruptive party?" Adrian Thorne, hearing his name, strode back over. "That's it! I've spoken to corporate. They are authorizing you to offer him a $1,000 travel voucher and move him. If he refuses, you are to have him arrested. End of story." $1,000. The offer was both an insult and a weapon. It was meant to paint Kevin as unreasonable if he refused. It was a sum designed to make other passengers think, "Just take the money and move." Frank looked at Kevin, a glimmer of triumph in his eyes. "There you have it, sir. A very generous offer. $1,000 in travel credit. Now, if you'll just gather your things." This was the moment. The final push. They believed they had him cornered, that his choices were to accept the insulting offer or face the humiliation of being dragged off the plane. They saw him as a lone man, stubborn and proud, fighting a battle he couldn't win against a corporate giant. They had no idea what was coming. Kevin held up his hand, silencing Frank. He took a deep breath, and the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath with him. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a litigator in his courtroom. "Frank Leora," he said, his voice now imbued with a chilling seriousness. "The seating issue is no longer my primary concern. My primary concern now is the safety of this aircraft and every single person on board." Frank and Leora exchanged a confused look. Thorne scoffed audibly. "Oh, here we go. What a pathetic gambit." Kevin ignored him, his eyes locked on the purser. "Before boarding, I observed a maintenance crew attending to a panel on the leading edge of the port side wing, just forward of the engine. From this vantage point," he gestured pointedly out his window, "I can see what appears to be a fluid leak originating from that same area. It has the distinct iridescence of skydrol hydraulic fluid. As you know, a hydraulic leak can compromise flight control surfaces, landing gear, and braking systems." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He wasn't just some nervous flyer. He used the technical term skydrol, and he understood its implications. "Therefore," Kevin continued, his voice resonating with absolute authority, "pursuant to Federal Aviation Regulation, Title 14, Part 9A1, which holds the pilot in command responsible for the airworthiness of their aircraft, I am formally lodging a passenger safety concern. I want it noted in the log that Seat 12A reported a potential hydraulic fluid leak on the port wing. I am respectfully requesting that the captain be notified immediately, and that a full ground inspection be performed before we push back from this gate." He finished speaking. The cabin was utterly silent. Frank's face had turned ashen. Leora's mouth was slightly agape. Adrian Thorne stood frozen, his smug expression melting away into disbelief. Kevin had just taken their chessboard and flipped it over. This was no longer about customer service, status, or a $1,000 voucher. It was about federal regulations. It was about air safety. He had invoked the one authority that trumped everyone, the pilot in command, and the one concern that could not be ignored. He had called their bluff, and in doing so had just shut down the entire flight. The immediate effect of Kevin's statement was like a stun grenade detonating in the hushed cabin. The words hydraulic fluid leak and Federal Aviation Regulation vaporized the triviality of the seat dispute. Frank, the purser, who moments before had been a figure of corporate authority, was now just a man facing a potential catastrophe, both for safety and for his career. Ignoring a passenger's complaint about a crying baby is one thing. Ignoring a formal, articulate and specific safety concern citing federal law is a career-ending and potentially life-ending mistake. Frank stammered, his composure shattered. He looked at Leora, but she was useless, her face a pale mask of shock. He looked at Thorne, whose rage had been replaced by a dumbfounded expression. Thorne's power, derived from money and influence, was utterly useless in this new arena. You can't bully a potential hydraulic failure. "Notify the captain," Kevin repeated, his voice calm but unyielding. "Now please, the safety of this flight depends on it." Frank fumbled for the interphone near the galley. His hand was trembling slightly as he punched in the code for the cockpit. Passengers in the surrounding seats were no longer just watching a drama. They were participants. Whispers broke out. Did he say a leak? What skydroll? Is it safe to fly? The seeds of panic had been sown, not by Kevin, but by the crew's own arrogance, which had pushed him to this point. A tense minute passed. Then another. The captain's voice, distorted and tinny, crackled over the interphone, inaudible to the passengers, but Frank's side of the conversation was telling. Yes, Captain. Passenger in 12A. He's a lawyer, sir. He seems to know what he's talking about. Yes. He mentioned a maintenance crew before boarding. He can see a sheen on the wing. Yes, sir. I understand. Frank hung up the phone, his face grim. He turned to the cabin, but before he could make an announcement, the captain's voice boomed over the PA system, calm and professional, but with an unmistakable undertone of seriousness. Good evening, folks. This is your captain speaking from the flight deck. We've been alerted to a potential maintenance issue by a passenger. As a matter of precaution, we will not be pushing back from the gate at this time. We are going to have our ground maintenance team come out and perform an inspection of the aircraft's port wing. This will unfortunately cause a delay. We appreciate your patience and will update you as soon as we have more information. Cabin crew, please stand by. The announcement sent a ripple of groans and frustrated sighs through the plane. People pulled out their phones to text loved ones about the delay. But beneath the frustration, there was also a palpable sense of relief. No one wanted to be on a plane with a potential safety issue. Adrian Thorne looked like he was going to explode. His entire power play had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. He hadn't just failed to get the seat. His arrogance had directly led to the grounding of the flight, jeopardizing the valuable time he was so desperate to protect. He shot Kevin a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Kevin met his gaze, his expression unreadable, then turned to look out the window again. Just as he'd anticipated, a ground vehicle with flashing lights was already speeding toward their aircraft. A team of mechanics in high-visibility vests swarmed toward the wing, carrying powerful flashlights and equipment. The area Kevin had indicated was now the center of intense, focused activity. He had forced their hand, and now the entire machinery of airline safety protocol was grinding into motion because of his words. Leora approached his seat, her demeanor now completely changed. The haughty superiority was gone, replaced by a nervous, almost fearful deference. "Mr. Marshall," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "the captain would like to speak with you." "Of course," Kevin replied, unbuckling his seatbelt. As he stood up to walk toward the cockpit, a strange thing happened. The executive across the aisle gave him a subtle nod of respect. A woman in the row behind him murmured, "Thank you." They understood. He hadn't done this out of spite. He had used the tools at his disposal to respond to an injustice, and in doing so, had stumbled upon something far more important. He had turned a personal slight into a public service. He walked past a seething Adrian Thorne and the pale-faced purser. As he stepped into the galley, he saw the cockpit door open. The captain, a man with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons, stood in the doorway. He didn't look angry. He looked intensely serious. "Are you the passenger from 12A?" the captain asked. "I am. Kevin Marshall." The captain nodded, extending a hand. "Captain Evans, please step inside and tell me exactly what you saw." As the cockpit door clicked shut behind him, Kevin knew the power dynamic on Flight 110 had been irrevocably altered. The flight attendants and the VIP passenger had tried to make him small, to render him invisible. But by forcing their hand, he had become the most important person on the entire plane. The fate of the flight, The schedules of hundreds of passengers and the careers of the crew now rested not on a platinum card, but on the credibility of his testimony. The cockpit of the Boeing 777 was a stark contrast to the passenger cabin. The chaotic human drama was replaced by the cool, orderly glow of dozens of screens and switches. Captain Evans, a veteran pilot with over 30 years of experience, gestured for Kevin to take the jump seat behind the first officer. "Mr. Marshall," Evans began, his tone devoid of any emotion except professional curiosity. "My purser tells me there was some kind of disagreement over a seat." "That's one way to put it," Kevin said calmly. "I was asked to give up my paid seat for another passenger, and I refused. When your crew threatened to have me removed from the flight, it became necessary to raise a more pressing issue." The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. "So this safety concern, was it retaliatory?" It was a fair question, the one Kevin knew would be asked. He had to establish his credibility instantly. "Captain, I am an officer of the court. Filing a false report is not in my nature. More to the point, my life is on this aircraft, as is yours. I saw something that concerned me, and the escalating confrontation over the seat simply provided the impetus to report it formally, rather than dismiss it as my untrained eye playing tricks on me. The crew's insistence on removing me from the one seat with a clear view of the issue made it imperative." He then recounted his observations with the precision of a lawyer presenting evidence. The ground crew's specific location and behavior, the exact placement of the iridescent sheen, and its consistency under the changing angles of the terminal lights. He spoke their language, not of emotion, but of observable facts. Captain Evans listened intently, nodding. "You mentioned Skydrol." "I've done some work on aviation liability cases," Kevin said, a slight understatement. He'd once spent 6 months deposing Boeing engineers for a major insurance lawsuit. He knew more about aircraft hydraulic systems than most people outside the industry. The first officer, who had been silent, turned in his seat. "Captain, ground maintenance is on the line. They've got a visual." Evans picked up his headset. Kevin could only hear his side of the conversation. "Go ahead. Maintenance?" "Uh-huh. A pinhole breach on the NAFR 3 slat actuator line?" "Affirmative. And it's an active drip." "Got it. Can it be patched here at the gate?" "No, I don't think so. Not with a full passenger load and a compromised primary flight control line. What's the recommended action?" "Right. Copy that." The captain put down the headset and let out a long, slow sigh. He scrubbed a hand over his face, then looked at Kevin. A new expression was on his face. Respect. "Mr. Marshall," he said, his voice heavy, "you just saved us from declaring an emergency over the Atlantic. Maintenance confirms an active hydraulic leak from a flight control actuator line. It's a small leak, but over the course of a 7-hour flight, it would have become critical. We would have lost fluid, possibly leading to a partial loss of flight controls on approach to Heathrow. You did the right thing." The first officer swiveled in his chair. A hell of a catch. Most people wouldn't have noticed that in a million years. "I was motivated," Kevin said dryly. Captain Evans permitted himself a grim smile. "I can imagine." "Well, that's it. This flight is cancelled. We're on the ground until that part can be replaced and the system is recertified." He flicked a switch on his console. His voice, now weary but firm, filled the cabin once more. "Folks, this is your captain again. I have an unfortunate update. Our maintenance team has confirmed a mechanical issue with the aircraft that cannot be resolved tonight. For the safety of everyone on board, I have made the decision to cancel this flight. I repeat, Global Air Flight 110 to London is cancelled. We understand this is a major disruption to your travel plans, and we sincerely apologize. Our ground staff will be at the gate to assist with rebooking and accommodations. Please remain seated for now, while we coordinate the deplaning process." The collective groan from the cabin was so loud it was audible through the reinforced cockpit door. A night of chaos, of hotel vouchers, frantic calls, and ruined schedules was about to begin for the 300 passengers on board. And Kevin Marshall was at the center of it all. When he emerged from the cockpit, the atmosphere in the cabin was toxic. Frank and Leora wouldn't meet his eyes. Their careers were, at this moment, hanging by a thread. They had not only failed at customer service, they had been oblivious to a serious safety issue that a passenger had to point out for them. Adrian Thorne, however, had found his voice again. As Kevin walked back toward his seat, Thorne blocked his path. His face was blotchy with fury. You did this!" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You couldn't just move, could you? You had to bring this whole plane down just to prove a point. My meeting in London was worth more than this entire damn airline. You have no idea what you've done." Kevin looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of weary pity. "You're right," he said softly. "I do have an idea of what I've done. I've potentially saved the lives of everyone on this plane, including yours. You should be thanking me." He stepped around the sputtering Thorne and returned to seat 12A to gather his belongings. As the deplaning process began, a gate agent, a harried-looking woman with a headset, came aboard and made a beeline for him. "Mr. Marshall?" she asked, her voice hushed. "The station manager would like to speak with you personally. If you'll come with me, we'll handle your arrangements separately." She led him off the plane, ahead of all the other frustrated passengers. As he walked down the jet bridge, he glanced back. He saw Adrian Thorne, red-faced and yelling at a gate agent who was trying to manage a growing crowd of angry travelers. He saw Leora standing near the galley, looking utterly defeated. The immediate karma was already being served. But Kevin knew this was only the beginning. The real consequences, the hard karma, were still to come. And they would be far more devastating than a cancelled flight. The Global Air Station Manager's office at JFK was an oasis of quiet efficiency amidst the pandemonium unfolding at Gate C422. The manager, a sharp man named Peterson, looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but he greeted Kevin with a firm handshake and a look of profound gratitude. "Mr. Marshall, on behalf of Global Air, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the conduct of our crew and our most sincere thanks for your vigilance," Peterson said, gesturing for Kevin to take a seat. "Captain Evans has fully briefed me. There's no hyperbole in saying you averted a major incident." Kevin simply nodded. He wasn't looking for accolades. "What happens now?" "For you? Anything you want," Peterson said frankly. "We have a seat for you in our first-class suite on the first flight to Heathrow tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. We've booked you into the presidential suite at the TWA Hotel for the night, all expenses covered. A car will be waiting for you when you land in London. Please consider it a small token of our appreciation." This was the corporate damage control machine in full swing. They knew Kevin could own them in a lawsuit, not just for the discriminatory treatment, but for the crew's negligence in failing to create an environment where a passenger felt comfortable reporting a safety issue without first being pushed to the brink. They weren't just rebooking him. They were trying to buy his silence and goodwill. "That's acceptable," Kevin said. He had a case to prepare for. A night of rest and a comfortable flight were all he required. "As for the crew involved," Peterson continued, his face hardening, "Purser Frank and flight attendant Leora have been removed from duty pending a full internal investigation. I can assure you, customer accommodation will not be a valid excuse for their behavior." The implication was clear. Their careers were over. While Kevin was being treated like royalty, chaos reigned supreme back at the gate. Adrian Thorne, accustomed to having problems solved for him, was now just another face in a furious crowd, all clamoring for the attention of a handful of overwhelmed gate agents. His platinum status was meaningless in the face of a cancelled flight and 300 angry passengers. He bellowed into his phone, trying to charter a private jet at a moment's notice, only to be told the earliest he could get a transatlantic slot was late the next day. His critical 9 a.m. meeting in London, a hostile takeover bid he'd been orchestrating for months, was impossible. The deal was structured with a hard deadline. His presence was non-negotiable. As his frustration mounted, he began screaming at a young gate agent, a woman named Chloe who was on the verge of tears. "Don't you know who I am? Get me a plane, now! This is incompetence on a scale I've never seen." What Thorne failed to notice was the sea of smartphones around him, all recording his tirade. The honeymooning couple, the executive who had been sitting across from Kevin, and a dozen others captured his meltdown in high-definition video. They had witnessed his arrogance on the plane and saw this as a fitting epilogue. Within the hour, the first video was uploaded to Twitter with the caption, "CEO type has epic meltdown after his attempt to bully a passenger gets his flight cancelled. Plane karma, poor horse Global Air." The video went viral overnight. By the time Kevin Marshall was waking up in his luxury hotel suite, JFK meltdown man was a trending topic. Internet sleuths, with their terrifying efficiency, quickly identified the man as Adrian Thorne, the notoriously aggressive CEO of the hedge fund Orion Capital. The clips were played on morning news shows. Memes were created. Thorne's face was plastered across the internet, a symbol of elite entitlement gone wrong. But the story had another layer. Passengers who were on the flight started adding comments and replies. "That's not the whole story," one wrote. "He tried to have a black gentleman thrown off the plane for not giving up his seat." Another added, "And the guy he tried to kick off was the one who found the safety issue that grounded the plane. He's a hero." The narrative shifted dramatically. It wasn't just about an arrogant man having a meltdown. It was now a story of racism, classism, and poetic justice. Kevin Marshall, though unnamed, became a folk hero, the calm, intelligent man who stood his ground against a bully and saved the plane in the process. Adrian Thorne's hard karma had begun, and it was swift and brutal. The fallout from the cancelled Global Air Flight 110 was not a single, explosive event, but a slow, creeping flood that seeped into the foundations of 3 very different lives, ultimately washing away the undeserving and leaving the worthy on higher ground. The final verdicts were not delivered in a courtroom, but in the unforgiving arenas of public opinion, corporate boardrooms, and personal conscience. For Adrian Thorne, the fall was a masterclass in modern disgrace. His journey into professional oblivion began before the deplaning was even complete. Standing amidst the throng of furious passengers, his power and influence had evaporated, leaving him as just another angry man in an expensive suit. His frantic calls to charter a private jet were met with logistical brick walls and astronomical price quotes. The world he was so used to commanding had suddenly become indifferent to his demands. The 9 a.m. London meeting, the culmination of a year's worth of ruthless planning for his hostile takeover of Marshall Falk's Pharmaceuticals, was no longer just in jeopardy. It was an impossibility. The realization descended on him, not with a bang, but with a cold, sickening dread. By the time he checked into a far less luxurious airport hotel for the night, the first videos of his meltdown at the gate were already spreading like wildfire. Initially, it was just another Karen-style clip, a moment of schadenfreude for weary travelers. But the internet's collective memory is long, and its investigative powers are formidable. Passengers from the flight began adding context in comment threads on Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook. The narrative quickly coalesced, painting a damning picture. A wealthy bully, identified as Adrian Thorne of Orion Capital, had tried to racially intimidate a black passenger, failed, and then threw a tantrum when the very same passenger saved the plane from a potential disaster. The hashtag #XJustPlaneKarma exploded. His name, his company, and the name of his target, Marshall Fawkes, were all trending by dawn. The board of Marshall Fawkes, a venerable British firm known for its ethical practices, convened an emergency virtual meeting at 6 a.m. London time. They didn't just see a viral video, they saw the embodiment of the corporate vulture persona they had been fighting against. Thorne wasn't just acquiring their company, he was threatening to gut it. His public behavior was a gift, a perfect justification to rally their shareholders. Before Thorne's rescheduled flight could even take off, Marshall Fawkes issued a press release that was both a corporate defense and a moral condemnation. Marshall Fawkes has always prized integrity, respect, and a commitment to human decency above all else, the statement read. The recent conduct of Mr. Adrian Thorne, CEO of Orion Capital, which has been widely documented, demonstrates a character so fundamentally at odds with our own that it makes any further discussion of an acquisition untenable. We cannot and will not allow our legacy of care and innovation to be tarnished by an association with such deplorable behavior. The board has voted unanimously to reject all current and future offers from Orion Capital. It was a corporate death sentence. The deal wasn't just dead, it was buried under an avalanche of public sanctimony. The news hit the financial markets like a shockwave. When the New York Stock Exchange opened, Orion Capital's reputation was already toxic. Major institutional investors, particularly public pension funds and university endowments with strict ethics clauses, began to panic. The California Public Employees Retirement System, CalPERS, one of Orion's largest investors, announced it was pulling its $500 million a stake, citing a complete loss of faith in the fund's leadership and ethical governance. That single announcement triggered a bank run. One by one, other investors followed suit, desperate to distance themselves from Thorne. He was no longer just a man who had a bad day. He was a liability, a walking symbol of reputational risk. The redemption requests snowballed into the billions. Orion Capital, a titan of the financial world, was hemorrhaging cash and credibility. Thorne's partners, men just as ruthless but far more discreet, turned on him. An emergency meeting was called. Thorne walked into the boardroom he had once dominated to find a row of cold, unforgiving faces. There was no debate. He was handed a resignation agreement. He was out. The man who had measured his life in dollars and minutes, whose time was once so valuable, was now adrift in an ocean of it. He retreated to his palatial Hamptons estate, a prisoner of his own making, watching the news ticker on a financial channel display the slow-motion collapse of his empire, all stemming from a single, arrogant demand for Seat 12A. For Leora and Frank, the consequences were a quiet but complete professional erasure. Global Air's internal investigation was brutal in its efficiency. They interviewed Kevin Marshall, who gave a calm, factual account via phone, Captain Evans, whose log entry was damning, and a dozen other passengers. The testimony was unanimous. Leora was described as condescending and racially biased. Frank was cited for his aggressive escalation and poor judgment. Their attempt to leverage company policy for a VIP's convenience was a serious infraction, but it was their complete obliviousness to the critical safety issue happening right outside the window that sealed their fate. The flight attendants' union put up a perfunctory defense. citing their long service records. But it was useless. As the airline's chief legal officer bluntly told the union representative, they harassed a passenger who then saved their aircraft. They failed as customer service professionals and as safety professionals. There is no defense. They are lucky Mr. Marshall isn't suing us into the ground. Both were terminated for gross misconduct. Their aviation careers, spanning a combined 50 years, were over. They weren't just fired, they became institutional parables. Global Air, in a massive and costly overhaul of its training, implemented a new program for all in-flight staff. It was called the GA-110 Protocol, a comprehensive module on de-escalation, unconscious bias, and prioritizing passenger-reported safety concerns. Frank and Leora's exchange with Kevin, anonymized but unmistakable, was used as the primary case study for what not to do. Their legacy was to become a textbook example of failure. And for Kevin Marshall, the victory was quiet, profound, and absolute. He landed in London on the 7 a.m. flight, refreshed from his night in the first-class suite, and walked into the arbitration hearing as if the previous day's drama had never happened. The ordeal had only sharpened his focus. He saw the parallels between Adrian Thorne and the arrogant opposing counsel he now faced. Both operated from a position of assumed superiority, believing their status put them above the rules. And just as he had on the plane, Kevin calmly and systematically dismantled them, not with aggression, but with a superior command of the facts and the rules of the game. He secured a decisive victory for his client, further cementing his reputation as one of the sharpest litigators in his field. He never filed the lawsuit. His assistant had prepared a draft that detailed a slam-dunk case for discrimination and negligence, with a settlement value estimated in the 8 figures. But Kevin told him to delete it. The airline had already given him what mattered: accountability. Thorne was ruined. The crew was fired. The system was being reformed. A lawsuit would have made it about money. By walking away, he made it about principle. It was a power move, a display of such supreme confidence that it earned him more respect from Global Air's executive leadership than any court judgment ever could. His story became a whisper network legend. Pilots would tell it on long-haul flights. Lawyers would share it over drinks. He was the man who won a dogfight at 30,000 feet with the law as his weapon. He hadn't sought the spotlight, and his anonymity in the media reports preserved his privacy. But within the circles that mattered, his stature grew immensely. Several months later, a large, impeccably wrapped box arrived at his office. Inside, cushioned in custom-fit foam, was a stunningly detailed 1/200 scale model of a Global Air Boeing 777-200ER. It was a collector's piece, perfect in every detail, right down to the Rolls-Royce engines. There was no sender's name on the package, but a small, polished brass plaque on the mahogany base held an inscription. It read, "Mr. Marshall, a good pilot always trusts his instruments, but a great pilot knows when to trust his wingman. In recognition of your invaluable co-pilot services on GA-110. Captain Evans." Kevin felt a slow smile spread across his face. It was a gesture of profound respect between two professionals, an acknowledgement that transcended corporate apologies and legal settlements. He walked over to the large bookshelf that dominated his office, a wall filled with law journals and case binders. He cleared a prominent space among them and set the model down. It didn't look out of place. It was a trophy, not of a fight he had won, but of a principle he had upheld, that in any system, under any pressure, the person who remains calm, knows the rules, and stands for what is right will ultimately hold the power. Kevin Marshall's story is a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't found in their title or their status, but in their character when challenged. He faced a moment of blatant disrespect, a situation familiar to too many, and he didn't just get angry, he got strategic. He used his intellect as his weapon and his composure as his shield. By standing his ground, he not only defended his own dignity, but also uncovered a critical safety issue, potentially saving hundreds of lives. The karma that followed wasn't supernatural. It was the direct, real-world consequence of actions. A bully's arrogance led to his public downfall, and a crew's prejudice led to the end of their careers. This story proves that integrity and intelligence are the ultimate equalizers. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more incredible stories of justice and karma, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. What would you have done in Kevin's situation? Let us know in the comments below.